Welcome everyone to the fourth session of panel 5 today. I'm happy that you're here. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the buildings in city and what is their role and how to renovate them and to achieve the goal of a climate neutral city. And today we want to go in another direction to a more holistic view of everything in the city. So today we are talking about new planning and evaluation methods for sustainable cities. And I'm happy that we have 3 speakers here today that they will talk about these topics. And today I will be your main host of the session, and Suzanne is with me. She will have a look on the chat, on the Q&A section on Hoover. So if you have questions, just feel free to ask them in the Q&A session on Hoover or in the chat, and then we can talk about that and have a great discussion. So let me first introduce you our first speaker. It's Estatia Vlasopoulou from Antisys. I hope I pronounced it correct. And she will talk about creating sustainability benefits by planning for integration of garden cities in the urban scale. And I'm really excited because I'm not so much into garden cities. And so, yeah, Estatia, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Estatia Vlasopoulou and I am going to present a study with the title Creating Sustainability Benefits for Planning for Integration of Garden Cities in the Urban Scale. I'm going to start with a little background on the relation between urban form and sustainability. An urban form is characterized by many aspects, such as density, layout, distribution of green areas, provision of facilities and services, variety and type of buildings, and transport infrastructure. The high rates of urbanization, with all the effects it comes with, such as lack of available housing and high costs at the city center, together with the variety of residents' preferences, has led to the development of urban sprawl phenomenon, which has massively been accused to contribute to an unsustainable urban configuration which cannot provide an efficient public infrastructure. Therefore, in order to tackle the sustainability problems related to the extremely low density of urban sprawl, the opposite urban configuration was proposed and has massively been accepted. That is the dense compact city model, the advantages of which have been presented in many studies, but often in relation to the disadvantages of urban sprawl. The question that arises, therefore, is how the sustainability performance of a middle-density urban configuration, like a modern garden city, can differ from the respective of the currently considered as the most sustainable urban form, which is the compact city. Coming to methodology, the comparison of the garden city sustainability performance with the compact city's performance required some assumptions and tools, since it is a complex and broad subject. Firstly, a sustainability certification tool for neighborhoods has been used, specifically CityLab for districts, which was used as a framework for indicators for assessing the sustainability performance. The tool required comparable data for the two urban configurations, which was not readily available from existing neighborhoods in Sweden. So a specific suburban area of Sweden was considered as an empty area, which was used to assume the setup of either a compact city-like neighborhood or a garden city-like neighborhood. Representative residential building types were chosen for each of the two urban forms based on the contemporary most common building material and building types in Sweden. So for the compact city, multi-story buildings with a concrete building frame were chosen, while for the garden city, low-rise buildings made of wood were chosen. Then, to make the comparison as objective as possible, it was decided to use the same green area factor of at least 0.5 for both urban forms and to include a basic level of services, facilities, and transport infrastructure for the scenario's respective number of residents, according to the standards of CityLab for urban areas. A particular focus was set on the carbon footprint from the residential sector, which was assessed using the life cycle assessment methodology with a functional unit of kilogram CO2 equivalent per square meter. All the building parts are included, and the LCA stages that were analyzed are A1 to 5, B2, B4, and C1 to 4. Based on current practice in Sweden for heating, compact cities buildings use district heating, while in the garden city, single-family houses use exhaust air heat pumps, and the multifamily buildings use geothermal heat pump. So all the main characteristics of the two compared urban form scenarios are presented in the table here. And in the figure, we can see the comparative land use consumption in the two urban form scenarios. The public green spaces that are not included neither in the green spaces within the property areas, nor in the requirements of CityLab for public green spaces, are referred to as extra green spaces. These are used to achieve the green area factor required, which is higher than 0.5. And as we can see in the third row of the table, the compact city can accommodate 1.5 times more residents than the garden city and has double the public green area per resident. However, the garden city has a large amount of private gardens, so a much larger percentage of private garden area per resident. And now coming to the results, first for the focus area of this study, which is the climate impact from the residential sector, a thorough quantitative analysis has been performed using LCA for all of the buildings as already mentioned. Here, the carbon footprint from the residential sector is depicted for the whole neighborhood scenarios, as well as the carbon footprint per square meter and per resident in the two analyzed urban form scenarios. Firstly, for the carbon footprint per year in the whole neighborhood, we can see on the graph at the bottom that the garden city scenario is performing better, which is unquestionable since it accommodates significantly less residents. A more objective way of comparison, however, is the comparison of the carbon emissions per square meter and mainly per capita in the two examined urban forms. The results show that the garden city scenario performs better in all the LCA phases with approximately 40% lower carbon emissions than the compact city scenario, both in terms of emissions per square meter and per person. The majority of the CityLab's indicators were assessed apart from the carbon footprint from buildings, but most of them mainly qualitatively. So regarding meeting places and range of services, the minimum requirements by CityLab certification tool were used in the setup of both. So both can be regarded as sustainable, providing a basic level of those, but there is a difference in the extent of public services and green spaces per person. Regarding aspects such as security and trust in the neighborhoods, a national survey showed that high-rise constructions create insecurity for residents that walk alone at night. In general, though, this indicator depends highly on socioeconomic criteria, such as marital status, gender, ethnicity, financial status, age, and education. These are factors that are not directly related to the physical characteristics of an urban form. For biodiversity and stormwater management, these were not directly assessed in the stage of the study that it's presented now, but the requirement for a minimum green area factor creates the conditions for provision of several ecosystem services in both urban forms. There is though a difference in those since the garden city has mostly private gardens, while the compact city has public green spaces. Here, the value of ecosystem services strongly depends on the management of the private gardens and on the quality of the public green spaces, but the garden city is thought to have a larger ecosystem services value. Lastly, for travel habits and climate impact from transport infrastructure, it has been proven that a sufficient density for an efficient public transport system is 50 residents per hectare. This study's garden city has 59 residents per hectare, which is larger than the limit that was just mentioned. It is, however, noticed that districts with single-family houses tend to have an increased number of cars. This, however, is mainly related to different lifestyle and to easily available and free of charge parking spaces, and not to the building types or the population density. Even though the contribution of the compact city to a more effective public transport is not questioned, it might be reasonable to say that it is not only the building types or the population density that causes the differences, but also socioeconomical aspects, planning processes, and the extent to which mixed land use is provided within the neighborhood. However, assuming that both urban forms use the same materials for transport infrastructure and have small differences in the land that they consume, then the garden city would have higher emissions per person from the transport infrastructure due to the fewer residents. The conclusion from the relative assessment of each indicator was that the two urban forms have similar performance when it comes to sustainability per person, even if each one can perform better than the other in relation to different indicators. For example, the compact city provides a better service system, a more effective public transport system, and lower climate impact per person from the transport infrastructure. On the contrary, the garden city can provide the residents with increased security levels, reduces carbon footprint per person from residences, and provides green areas in a very close proximity. When conducting the study, some alternatives of some assumptions were also analyzed. One of them was to use wooden buildings instead of concrete buildings in the compact city. And with this variation, the carbon footprint per person was reduced by 20%. However, the garden city is still performing better, with about 24% lower emissions, because of the extra materials that the high-rise constructions require. Then a sensitivity analysis was performed for the type of concrete that is used in the compact cities buildings. So a more climate-friendly concrete was chosen, one that was recently developed and in which a part of cement is replaced with fly ash and slag. The emissions from the production stage were reduced by 16%, and totally, both per person and per square meter, the carbon footprint was reduced by 8%. However, the emissions per person are still significantly higher in the compact city than in the garden city. And finally, it was decided to look at a more densified compact city. So here, some of the common green areas are replaced with green roofs, covering 70% of the building's roofs, in order to be able to reach the required green area factor, while giving room for more residential buildings. In the densified compact city, there are almost double the residents, but the public green spaces per resident is almost half compared to the original compact city. The carbon footprint from the residential sector per square meter and per person remain equal to the original compact city scenario, because exactly the same buildings are used for the residential sector. However, looking at the carbon footprint for the whole neighborhood in the graph on the left, the results are significantly worsened due to the densification, and it can also be noted that in a comparison with the garden city, the densified city scenario accommodates 2.1 times more residents, but emits 2.9 times higher carbon equivalent emissions from the residential sector. In general, though, the emissions in each neighborhood are proportional to the amount of residents. So, to sum up, the high urbanization rates of our times require continuously new residential developments. The socioeconomic differences and preferences create a need for a variety of housing types and housing tenures, a need which nowadays often is neglected. According to a national survey, approximately 70% of the Swedes want to live in single-family or semi-detached houses, and the current urban area configurations do not provide the conditions to meet the desires of the people, and a lot of new houses tend to be built in insufficiently planned areas, creating a need for expensive and environmentally unfriendly infrastructure and increased traveling distances. In Scandinavia, a second home tradition is also observed, which means that dense areas create need for compensation traveling. The outcome of this study is that there is no one-size-fits-all concept when planning for sustainable urban areas, since the sustainability of an urban form depends on a large variety of factors. And the garden city model can provide advantages in areas where the compact city model is limited and vice versa. So this means that planning for an integration of garden city-like neighborhoods in the urban scale could provide a number of benefits in the sustainability performance of the future urban areas. Sustainability is mainly about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs. Thus, the goal should not be to meet the needs of an increased population and its related transports by investing both financially and in terms of resources and emissions in large infrastructure projects. The aim should be to build resource-efficient, smart, satisfying the citizens' needs and creating the necessary conditions to connect areas with efficient transit system. So here we can see the suggested city planning with a variation between garden city-like neighborhoods and compact city-like neighborhoods. And this variation between areas with low-rise housing and areas with a high density would also give opportunities for people to choose out of a larger variety of different types of buildings, creating diversity in city. With this planning, all the city centers are connected with each other with public transportation, a fact that encourages a reduced car use and increased sustainability. So that was all from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. First of all, I have a small question, because you just mentioned now your planning approach, and we have in the cities we have the problem of really highly limited space. So what is your opinion regarding that? That in garden cities we can just build less apartments than in dense cities. So what do you think about that problem?
Yeah, so that it is true that in general the garden cities can accommodate a lot less residents, but this was not exactly in the scope of this project, as it was planned to have the same area planned either as a garden city or as a compact city. So this was a constant parameter of the study. It was not assessed how the land use would be affected by this planning. But other than that, I would say that in general, in Sweden, there is not such a problem with land use. And another aspect is that since people tend to use second homes, they really tend to build outside the city center. So yes, they use land that wouldn't be used otherwise.
Okay, yeah, because in Germany, for example, we have these growing cities, and there's this highly limited space in the cities, and so yeah, it's complicated. But what do you think? How can or how should we motivate people to implement this concept of garden cities?
Yes, well, the outcome of this study is actually that it is more climate friendly to build garden cities like per person and per square meter housings. So I guess that one aspect that is mostly discussed is that it's not climate friendly to build garden cities. So since we showed that it is climate friendly, then the question is only on how to deal with the land use. So I think that based on the preferences of people, I know that here, a lot of people in Sweden, a lot of people want to live in single family houses. This is a good motivation, I think, for people to build more garden cities.
Yeah, but yeah, my question is more to the city planners or the the measures of the cities, so that do you have, or can you think of measures how you can promote this concept for city planners to use it?
You mean financially?
For example, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I have not thought about this actually, but yes, I guess that the most important factor is to meet the needs of the people, of the residents. So politicians, for example, if they want to meet the needs of the residents, they should consider something like that in order to prevent people from building outside the city and creating larger problems like with inefficient transport, infrastructure, etc.
And can you maybe add some more words about how your findings can contribute to the existing cities and existing building stock?
Yes. So when they are planning for densification of cities, for example, instead of building for more compact cities, which is more high-rise buildings and densifying like that, they could integrate the garden cities, like planning in this circle that I showed in the last slide, planning like that in the outside of the city center, so that there is like an alteration between the two urban forms. So it is mainly when they want to densify the cities, but not the city center itself. It's mainly for suburban areas.
Okay, and on your last slide, these dots, they were real city centers or centers in one city, different centers in one city?
Different centers in one city. The main city center is the central one.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I think we have no more questions, or I have looked to Suzanne. Okay. So then thank you very much. Then we are leaving now the concept of garden cities, but we will come back to that later in our last presentation of this session. But now we want to go to our next speaker. It's Rajat Gupta from Oxford Brookes University, and he will talk about the mapping of local areas for engaging communities in the planning of smart local energy initiatives. So he will talk a little bit more about the planning aspect of sustainable cities. So the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to present a paper on spatio-temporal mapping of local areas for engaging communities in planning smart local energy initiatives. Just to give an outline of the presentation, I'm going to give some background and context, followed by what the study objectives are, explain the method, the findings we discovered, and then end with some final thoughts. So in terms of background and context, we know that energy systems around the world, especially in UK, are becoming more decarbonized, decentralized, and digitalized to meet net zero targets. We also know there's a growth of smart local energy initiatives in UK, which can help to overcome energy network constraints by better aligning local energy demand with distribution and energy supply. Despite user engagement being essential for acceptance of such initiatives, a recent study that we had done identified that only 30% of such projects provided any evidence of user engagement. And we looked at a database of about 120 of these projects. Geospatial energy mapping tools are emerging as important tools for planning these initiatives because they can provide rapid and accurate spatial intelligence to a range of stakeholders. Most of these mapping tools, unfortunately, are very technical. They have low engagement levels and very few offer two-way flow of information. And those were the things that we were trying to address through our study. So our study objectives were to develop, trial, and evaluate an online and interactive spatio-temporal mapping tool, which can support the planning of smart local energy neighborhoods in Oxfordshire. This is part of Project LEO, Local Energy Oxfordshire, and Energy Rev research program funded by EPSRC. So in terms of our approach, we first gathered data from different private and public sources, which led to the initial development of the tool. We then demonstrated the working of the tool by applying it to a neighborhood in Oxford. And then we trialed it with target users. The feedback was gathered to refine the tool. In terms of the detailed development process, we gathered data sets on energy, building, socioeconomic data, which was mapped, and then energy profiles were created through something called CREST model. We created an online website to display these maps and profiles technically. We developed different engagement elements, ensured there was two-way communication with users, and then trialed the tool and gained feedback and refined it. The tool has been organized around 3 technical and 3 engagement elements. So the 3 technical elements start with baselining, which is really about local area energy flows in relation to socioeconomic and dwelling characteristics. We then have something called targeting capability to identify dwellings which are suitable to deploy different low carbon technologies such as heat pumps, rooftop solar, EV chargers, essentially energy assets that can provide energy flexibility. We also have something called forecasting, so that at a postcode level, you can start to see energy demand profiles and how those will change when different low carbon technologies get deployed. We have then complemented the 3 technical elements with 3 engagement elements. It's through participatory mapping, which is essentially a new way of gathering information from residents by allowing them to give some information about their household, but in return then visualize their energy profile, compare how they perform against their neighborhood, and see how their own energy profile will change when they deploy different low carbon technologies. There's also the capability of story map, by which project stakeholders can create a blog of the local area energy flows, and then also something called forum, which is there to encourage communication between users of LEMAP and project stakeholders. And those are the 6 elements that underpin this tool called LEMAP, Local Energy Mapping. So just to go through baselining first, I'll quickly go through each element and then how the trial was run and the feedback gathered. So baselining has 3 components: the context, the energy demand, and energy resources. It's based on S3 GIS platform, and you can see that you can go into this platform. You can see, at LSOA level or postcode level, different areas, in terms of which ones are fuel poor. You can easily, zoom into it and also see the same information at postcode level. It's got the GIS functionality where you can search, filter as you wish. In this case, you're searching for fuel poverty, for example. You can look at what data layers are there for each map, and you can switch them off or switch them on, overlay them to, gain spatial intelligence. You can also then zoom into or have a window to calculate how many homes there are. For example, what's the average floor area? You can do that by build form as well. And then you can also kind of start to zoom into other bits and start to see, for example, here, the domestic annual mean electricity consumption by postcode. And you can do the same thing for not just electricity, but for gas as well. And then again, at any given stage, you can kind of switch on, switch off things. You can also overlay that with energy performance certificates of homes in that area. And then you can also look at energy resources, what rooftop solar they're already there, any EV chargers that are there, and what is the energy profile. You can also overlay the secondary substation areas to really see if there are any areas, constraints, and what are the existing low carbon technologies that are there installed in that area. Like in this area, you can zoom in and see, for example, the different substations. You can then go on to targeting. So once you know the local area energy flows, you can also start to see, rooftop solar, which homes can have based on filters. All the filters are open, and you can kind of override them if you want, or refine them as per your requirements. You can, for example, also see heat pumps, EV chargers, and then you can add and combine different measures like rooftop solar with batteries or with heat pumps, with EV chargers as well. And just to show you for EV chargers as well, and then you can start to see either, where they can be installed, and then what's the distribution of that, at postcode level. In forecasting, you can also see the energy profiles of each postcode, and you can see what we are showing here is how does the electricity demand change when in the heating season and the non-heating season with EV chargers, and how does that compare with the carbon intensity. So it gives a lot of information to people. How does the demand relate to carbon intensity of the grid? And then you can overlay that with time of use tariff. So it gives people a lot of information about when the demand is happening in relation to carbon optimization or let's say price-based optimization. We also have the participatory mapping, and this is essentially for householders to gain value. So what we've done is if the householders agree to provide some information about their home by filling an online survey form, which asks information about where the home is located, what kind of home it is, what kind of, for instance, windows, other physical features, how many people live in the home, the kind of appliances they use. And if they submit that form and allow us to map it, we can map it. And also then using the email of the householder, they can access information about electricity profile of their homes in winter and summer. They can also start to overlay that against benchmarks to see how they perform against their neighbor, against the national average. And then also they can do the LCT potential. So you can actually overlay this. As you can see, the green bit tells you the self-consumption. If they had rooftop solar, what's the self-consumption of PV? And then if they had battery as well, when is the battery could potentially discharge. So it tells them a lot of information that is normally not easily accessible or available in terms of how energy demand profiles would change when different low carbon technologies get added. Because the whole aim of LEMAP is to encourage communities and residents to take up these technologies to be able to provide energy flexibility. Then story map can be used to create local energy flows for the area, and these can be developed as a blog by the project stakeholders for the end users. And they are linked to live maps, so they can be changing as well. Then the forum is really important because that provides a platform for communication between residents and between end users, and as well as project stakeholders and end users as well. And there are chat functions, there are FAQs here. We have a user guide for the tool available here. And as you can see here, we are very clear about the three technical elements on baselining, targeting, and forecasting within LEMAP, and the three engagement elements, which are participatory mapping, story map, and forum. And you can see here, some of the functionality that we offer within forum in terms of creating blogs, posts, and chat functions, and leaving comments as well. Okay, so we trialed the tool to a neighborhood called Rose Hill, which is a socially disadvantaged neighborhood, but data rich, located in the southwest of Oxford. We trialed the tool with 6 project managers of a community interest company who were responsible for planning something called Smart and Fair Neighborhoods as part of Project Leo. We had 3 meetings with them, or 3 online workshops earlier in the year. You can see examples of those. We showed the tool, we let them try it out. We also then had a user guide alongside, and then we gathered some feedback from them on how well they thought the tool was performing and what could be improved. So here's the evaluation, and from the survey that we did. So most of them agreed or strongly agreed that LEMAP could help them in the planning and delivery of smart and fair neighborhoods. Most of them found LEMAP easy to understand and navigate. There were some issues with regard to the screen size and the size of the mapping, which we've since then addressed. They found the organization of LEMAP very logical, especially the engagement element and the technical elements. Majority of them found the LEMAP approach innovative in providing spatial intelligence about local areas. So overall, we found that this tool has filled a gap that was there in terms of providing spatial intelligence rapidly and accurately to project managers who are going to deliver these projects. So what did we learn? If I bring it all together, what have we really gathered from this development? trial and evaluation of this new tool that we call DMAP. Overall, I think it was found to be an innovative and useful tool for displaying both spatial and temporal aspects of local energy. And that's quite important because you begin to see, which areas can be targeted and how will the energy demand profiles of the areas change once different technologies are installed. The balance between technical and engagement aspects was found to be a novel feature of LEMAP. And this is, we believe, not present in many tools to date, because we are bringing both the time series bit as well as the spatial bit. Just to be clear, we are not connecting to smart meters here. It's an estimate based on an industry standard model called CREST, which is developed by Loughborough University. So we are, the bit that is innovative about LEMAP is that we have publicly available data with privately available data, which is by registration or data that we bought, alongside crowdsourcing of data through participatory mapping. And we found that those three bits have really helped in enriching the tool, especially the crowdsourcing bit, which was found to increase the accuracy of LEMAP because there was more local data and there was more local data interpretation. LEMAP was also able to aggregate data at postcode level, and that preserved that data privacy as well, but still provided a spatial resolution level because we do hold data at property level, but we display data at the postcode level for project stakeholders. But equally, residents who are able to provide us with more data, they can also gain value by accessing more information about their property, using the temporal aspects of LEMAP. We also believe that LEMAP could help network operators, the district network operators, to overlay their network constrained areas with areas that have potential for deploying these distributed energy resources. Because they can say, network operators can see where there's going to be a surge in those distributed energy resources, where actually they could help in doing some balancing of supply and demand locally. And then finally, in future, we think LEMAP will also hold something called capability lens approach, which has been developed by Center for Sustainable Energy, because we want to really also identify beyond the technical feasibility of deploying technologies, also versus which households are likely to adopt these low carbon technologies and who will be left behind potentially. Because I think we need that both sets of information so that we can ensure that, how the offerings can be developed by community groups for these smart local energy initiatives so that, no one gets left behind in this transition. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. First of all, we have a question from Sam Hampton. He talked on Tuesday, I think, also about low carbon scenarios for Oxfordshire. So maybe it could be interesting for you to get in touch with each other because you're both working with the concept or the concept of low carbon Oxfordshire. And he asks, how difficult was it to gather the data required? You talked about crowdsourcing, I think. Can you say a few more words about that?
Yes, thanks, Sam. Sam and I work together on projects, so I know it really well. Okay. Yes, the data has come from different sources, and we've organized that into the publicly available data first, which is relatively easy to gather, but takes time to clean. So, if you look at energy performance certificate data, you can gather it easily, but you have to make sure that it's attached to, the suitable properties, whatever it's for. That takes a few months. We've got some privately available data, essentially the data that we bought from different sources. And then we've gone on to crowdsourcing, where we worked with local community groups who have helped us in connecting with residents to gather data about their homes. So it's an online link for a survey, which is really sent through the community group newsletters. And then if we find that residents are interested in gaining value about their home as well, in terms of understanding what is the potential for installing low carbon technologies that can offer energy flexibility services, for example, by giving simple data items such as how many people are in the household, what are the typical appliances, occupancy patterns, and then we have a model working behind it which does the calculation and shows the result. That information is shown only to the householder, just to be clear. So whoever is kind of giving that information, we seek the necessary permissions from them, and then we can display on the map if they give us permission. If not, it is only shown to the householder. And it's taken us, just to be very clear, this is part of Project LEO, which is Local Energy Oxfordshire. It's one of the large smart local energy demonstrator projects in the UK. And as part of LEO, there is a program of work called Smart and Fair Neighborhoods, where distributed energy resources are being deployed in local areas. And LEMAP is really helping the project managers of those smart and fair neighborhoods to deliver those projects. So it's done for Rose Hill at the moment. We are going to do more neighborhoods within LEO. And it takes, the first one took us about, I think, 4 months to do. I'm hoping that this will be quicker as we go forward because we've sorted out a lot of data-related issues. Does that answer the question, Marcus?
Yeah, I think, but maybe one additional question. Have you worked together with district heating operators or with electricity providers?
Yeah. So we were fortunate that LEO, the project we are working in, is led by a district network operator.
Okay.
So it wasn't that difficult to, of course, work with them. But just to be clear, that most of the DNOs in UK now provide a lot of data on primary substations publicly. It may not be public knowledge, but you actually can get that data. It takes time to clean the data and make it usable and accessible, but that's available. But because we were fortunate to be working with them, we've actually gone a step below, and we've actually gone to secondary substation level as well. So we know the potential areas of constraints for different secondary substations within those neighborhoods. That information may not be forthcoming that easily if you're not working with the DNO, but saying that, I know quite a few DNOs in UK are now making that information available to encourage local energy action.
Okay, now we have a few more questions regarding the tool itself. Maybe first of all, who has access to this tool or to this map?
Yes, so we have two groups of kind of a target audience. The first one are project stakeholders, those who are interested in delivering low carbon initiatives, especially smart energy neighborhoods. And those are organizations such as local authorities, community-based organizations. So, we were working with an organization called Low Carbon Hub in Oxfordshire. And essentially, it's a community interest company which is delivering these projects. And also, district network operators. So these three groups really can, access the tool, and that is designed for them. Saying that, we've also designed it for residents and community groups. So residents can access the engagement bits of the tool, while the other project stakeholders access the technical bits of the tool. So yeah, and that's how we've kind of trialed it as well.
Okay, and can the residents also access this overview map with the buildings and this cool things you showed?
Yes, so within GIS, there's a functionality we've used called Story Map, which is essentially a blog of your findings, but linked in real time to the map. So if you change the map, the blog changes. And that story map has been made available to residents, because after running these trials, we found that if you make all the technical elements also available to residents, it's just information overload, and they don't need that much. They can if they wish, but really it's the engagement bit, which does include exactly what you're saying, Marcus, through story map.
Okay, and then we have a lot of questions now. How do you update, or is it planned to update the map, and at what frequency?
Yes, so again, we were fortunate that in LEO project, we have both the City Council in Oxford and the County Council in Oxfordshire working with us. And Oxfordshire is signed up to an energy strategy, as you know, and there's a larger mapping tool at the county level, which is being developed, to which LEMAP connects. So it does get updated regularly, because it's not just restricted to Project LEO, it's much beyond. And we are hoping that, we will be we are at the moment updating it regularly, but even after the project, it should get updated, every 6 months or so, because it's connected to a wider mapping tool. And for those of you who understand GIS mapping, it's very easy to share information within mapping because you have shape files. So there's no interoperability issues here.
Yeah, but I think frequent updates are really important for such a tool, because I know there are a lot of tools and a lot of projects and EU projects where tools are developed, and then after 5 years they are unusable because the data are old. Okay, and now a question: how do you motivate the residents to join?
Yes, so as I said, we are not engaging with residents directly, we engage through the intermediary, which is the local community group, which is seen as this trusted organization. And we are at the moment working with neighborhoods where there are active community groups. So in Rose Hill, which you saw, there is a very kind of active community group, Rose Hill and Ifli Low Carbon Group, who are engaging with the residents and who promote the tool and to the residents through their newsletters, through their engagement modes, who in turn then provide us with that information. And that kind of helps us because we get a kind of an endorsement from the local community group that this is worth engaging with. We also find that for us it's useful because it tests nationally gathered data locally with local data interpretation. For the residents is useful because they can get very quickly some knowledge about what they can do to their homes in terms of smart local energy systems. Yes, so it seems to be working for the moment.
Okay, and can you say maybe a little bit about the response? So how is the current response of residents joining the map?
Yes, so at the moment we are in the trial stage with the community groups and with the smart and fair neighborhood groups, who are then going to be promoting it widely to the residents. So far, the ones who have tested have given us positive feedback. We did have some feedback about making it simpler, not having too much of technical detail with residents, and focusing on the value that residents will gain. And that's what we've been working on, and that's why we've added this functionality for Forum. But just to be clear that so far the engagement has been good. We've had over 80% people kind of saying it's an innovative and useful tool. But in the coming months, we will be kind of doing a widespread deployment of this. So, I could certainly look at what happens that time. But so far, it's encouraging.
Cool. And then we have two smart questions. The first one is building level labeling info also public available in the UK?
Yes, so energy performance certificates are publicly available. You can go onto the government website and you can type in any postcode and you will be able to download the EPC data. So yes, that is available. But saying that, data being publicly available and data being accessible and useful are two very different things. It takes a long time or some time to actually make that data clean and usable. But yes, the short answer to your question is, yeah, it is publicly available.
All right, and then a last question from Lorenzo. He asked if the data on energy use and load profiles are available on level of households, and I don't think if the question is if the data is available on household or building level, because you said that it's available on building level, but is it also or
to be honest, you can get the data at household level. We've done the analysis at that level, but we've aggregated the data because we don't want to show it, at that level. But for a household who will fill the survey form, they will get information customized for their household, obviously. But for a project stakeholder who's looking at the local area, they will be able to aggregate, they'll see aggregated data at postcode level for obvious reasons. But yes, the aggregation happens with, high resolution data at household level. So yes, it is there. If necessary, it can be extracted.
All right, then thank you very much, Rajat, for this very interesting presentation and this cool tool. I think that, yeah, it's a really, really nice project. And now we are going back to the concept of garden cities. So our next speaker, Masa Bagheri from Fraunhofer, and she will talk about urban social sustainability and the development of an indicator set. So Masa, the stage is yours.
Hello everyone, my name is Masa Bagheri. I'm a researcher at Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research in Karlsruhe, Germany. And today I'm going to present a part of my research, which is about social sustainability in the garden cities. Therefore, I will shortly talk about the main two parts, sustainability and garden city movement. Then I will give you some insight on the background of the research and will shortly present the results of the literature review. And finally, I will explain my approach for defining an indicator set. The concept of sustainability has been introduced in the 80s, and since then it has been widely discussed by different scholars. The flexibility of the concept results in several attempts in reinterpreting and redefining the meaning of sustainability to make it compatible with the discussed issues. It covers the discussions at different areas and various scales. It has 3 dimensions: social, economic, environmental, and among the 3 pillars of sustainability, social aspects has received the least attention in literature in the beginning of its introduction, but around the beginning of the century, then social dimension started also to catch more attention in sustainability discussions. Here you can see the relative importance of the 3 dimensions of sustainability over time. As can be seen in the picture, in the beginning of the sustainability discussions, the environmental aspect had the most importance. But then after a while, other dimensions had also started to get attention, and starting from the beginning of the century, then there is somehow a balance among different aspects of sustainability. I will get back to sustainability topic in a minute, but before that, I would shortly introduce the concept of garden city movement. This movement is one of the most influential ones in the history of urban planning, and it was introduced at the end of the 19th century by Howard. It was a response to overcrowded and deteriorated cities and tried to find a solution to improve the quality of life of the residents in these cities. It suggested building new towns, which were called garden cities, and they were supposed to provide the advantages of both cities and countrysides. The movement was first introduced in England, but it was soon spread all around the world, and Germany was one of the first countries to implement the ideas of the garden city movement. One of the garden city examples which was built in Germany is the garden city in Karlsruhe. It is actually one of the first and the most important German examples which was constructed starting from 1911. To get an overview of the perception of living in the garden city more than a century after its construction, I carried out a survey a few years ago in this garden city. So I distributed a questionnaire among the inhabitants of the garden city, and the questionnaire covered topics like the buildings, the inhabitants, and the neighborhood. I analyzed the data which was collected from this survey, and when it was possible, I compared it with the overall trends from Germany using the official statistics. I'm going to just show the result of one of the questions that I had asked in this survey, which is relevant for our discussion today. I had asked the residents how long they have lived in the garden city at the time of the questionnaire. The result is interesting. Here you can see that the results for both Germany and the garden city of Karlsruhe are shown. If we compare the collected data from the garden city and the available data for Germany, we see a noticeable difference between the ongoing trends. The participants in the study had lived in the garden city on average for around 34 years. And this figure is 18.5 years for Germany, which is almost a half. With the graph, I wanted to get to the definition of sustainable communities. Sustainable communities are places where people would like to live and work now and in the future. And one of the measures of community sustainability is community stability, meaning that there are not so many changes and comings and goings in the community. If we look again at the aims of the garden city, which I just mentioned, we will see things like improving quality of life through building a well-planned city to provide accommodation and working opportunities for people of different social classes. And if we compare the definition of sustainable communities with the aims of the garden city, we will see some similarities like quality of life, service for everyone, and well-planned cities. Considering these similarities between the definition of sustainable community and the objectives of the garden city, and also following the survey that I had conducted in the garden city, I have decided to study the sustainability in the garden city, with the hypothesis that the characteristics of the garden city motivate people to stay long in the garden city, making the garden city a sustainable community. I've defined the following research question: how can we measure social sustainability in garden cities? To answer this question, I had to first define social sustainability in general, and then adjust the definition to match the characteristics of the garden city. To do this, I've carried out a literature review which covered several topics like definition of social sustainability in general and urban social sustainability in particular, methodologies for sustainability assessment, and also the indicators that are used for the definition of sustainability. Through the literature review, I could identify around 15 definitions for social sustainability. I could also collect more than 30 assessment methodologies consisting of reporting, rating, certification, and checklisting procedures. And I could also identify over 50 indicator sets. Next, I used the outcome of the literature review to define an indicator set for measuring social sustainability in the garden cities. I followed an approach which had 4 steps, which are listed here, but the 4 steps could be extended with 2 more steps, which I will explain later. The first step for me was to extract the indicators that are named by different scholars for defining sustainability at different scales. This was the outcome of the literature review, and it looks like what you see here, this table, where the indicators, the scale of where the indicator is used, and what is the objective of the study are shown in this table. The next step was to somehow clean up the identified indicators by removing the repetitions and similarities. In step 3, then I selected some main categories based on social sustainability standards. The categories that I chose are livability, equity, social cohesion or interaction, safety and security, health and leisure, urban form. I chose these indicators somehow in a way that they also match the characteristics of the garden city and they're relevant for the garden city. In the next step, then I assigned the shortlisted indicators from the previous steps into the selected categories. The results of these 4 steps that I just explained is a table which looks like this, with the categories that I had selected and the assigned indicators for each category. This is somehow my proposed set of indicators that I came up with as a result of the literature review and further analysis. But this set of indicators is going to be used as the basis for the framework for studying social sustainability in the garden city. Therefore, to verify this list, I would suggest adding 2 more steps to this approach. The first one would be an expert consultation. So the experts from different relevant fields would be contacted, and they would be asked to rank the relevance and importance of the proposed indicators. For each category, all the indicators would be listed, and the expert can choose one option whether or not this indicator is relevant or important. They can also suggest other indicators that are not listed in this indicator set. The last step would be then to analyze the results of the survey, the expert consultation, and to weight the indicators and to use them then for developing the framework for social sustainability in the garden cities. These 2 last steps have not yet been done. The consultation, the expert survey has been designed and the experts are identified, but the next steps are not done yet. So with this, I come to the last point in my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention and would be happy to get your feedback and answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masa, for this presentation. And first of all, we have a nice comment in the chat where Kirsten said, yeah, she likes the optimistic x-axis indication of yeah, that more than 100 years of lifetime for residents. So yeah.
Yeah, that's I tried to just shortly answer that comment also. That's actually the interesting part in the garden city, that there are some families that have lived generations in the garden city. So as I mentioned, the garden city has been constructed, the one in KARLSRUHE, in 1911, and there are families that the grandparents were involved. So they were actually the first ones to move in the garden city, and then the kids and then the grandkids have lived there. And so not only the family had stayed there, and also then the children have then decided to stay in the garden city. So that when they moved out from the parents' place, they still decided to get another house in the garden city. And that was also something which was really interesting for me. And in this questionnaire that I just mentioned, also one of the questions that I had asked was, what is the reason for you to be in the garden city? And yeah, of course, some of them, they were actually born in the garden city, but a lot of them, they had decided. So either they had moved to the garden city as a grown-up, or they had spent their childhood, and then as a grown-up, they had decided to stay. So that's actually what makes the garden city really interesting and fantastic.
Yeah, then I'm excited because I learned now that I live in a garden city in Karlsruhe. So yeah, maybe I can reach the 100 years. We'll see. Yeah, okay, then, but maybe a more, yeah, a more topic-related question. Who do you think should use your indicator set, and why?
So there are some target groups actually. The first, it should be mentioned that garden city, so the people who live in the garden city, they actually don't own the properties. That was the initial idea in the garden city, that people would just rent, and this community ownership exists in the garden city. So if there are some added values in the property over years, then the idea was that it would be not on a private level, but on the community level. So that's interesting to mention. And then it means that there is an organization for managing all this stuff in the garden city, like taking care of the house, deciding who's going to get the house, and doing the maintenance and all the administrative work in the garden city. So the organization of the garden city is definitely one of the target groups that that can use this the result of this study. And the other ones are actually the urban planners that are involved in the city planning. And because I think we're not going to build another garden city exactly the way it was initially designed, but it's important to get the positive points of the garden city, because in the further development of the cities, or if we're going to develop new cities or new parts of the city, it's important to get what has worked in the garden city and what not, and just get the best of what has been done and use it just in the new designs.
Okay. And what do you think is the potential of garden cities in terms of the building stock? Maybe the same question I asked before, because I think in the building stock or in the existing cities, it's quite difficult to implement new concepts. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, exactly. That as just mentioned, I don't think with the density that we have in the garden city, it would probably be a feasible thinking that we can build another garden city exactly as it was designed. Although it's also interesting what the initial ideas of the garden city were not really implemented anymore. So in the beginning, it was really, so the concept has been implemented, but there was a lot of room for interpretation, and detailed designs were really up to the designers and the architects for each garden city. But I think what is important also on the urban form level is to learn from that. So maybe not necessarily every family gets a single family house with the garden, because I also asked that in my questionnaire whether or not they're still using the gardens, because in the garden city, the idea was actually that each family deserves to get a single family house with the garden, so that they will be also self-sufficient, they can grow their vegetables, and they can have a better quality of life. And I asked in my questionnaire, are you still using that garden? Most of them say no. So maybe not every single family needs a garden anymore, but the community feeling, the sense of belonging that exists in the garden city, and these neighborhood connections, that's so the result for me was that they're extremely satisfied with the type of living in the garden city. Of course, they have also some stuff that they're not happy with, but the result was that they're mostly satisfied with the living in the garden city, and they recommended living in the garden city. So I think those qualities are important that we can get. So how can we design the cities, or which elements of the garden city can we get to make people, or to motivate people to have a better communication with the neighborhood, or to give them actually a better life? So I think the elements of the garden city are the important things that we can learn from.
And just to make it clear, your indicator set in general could also be used for other city concepts.
That's actually what I'm trying to do, because I realized that there's no city, there's no set only for the garden city, because garden city is something in between. It's not a city, it's not a neighborhood. Initially it was supposed to be a city by itself. It was supposed to be self-sufficient, but it's actually not. So my idea was to design something which could be adjusted to the characteristics of the garden city, but on a more general level, yes, it actually could be used for any other city. But what is important in this urban social sustainability is that depending on which scale we're talking about, then the indicators could be also different. So it could be at the scale of a neighborhood, or a city, or a region. That makes it different.
Okay, now we have another question. Kirsten asked, if I understand you correctly, a garden city area includes also agricultural production. And do you see that as a feasible option in larger cities?
As I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but again, I go back to the initial idea. It was supposed to be so around the garden cities. The initial ideas, they were supposed to be green belts. So the idea was, first, they will not grow more than a certain size, the garden city, and second was, of course, for the recreation. So the more green, and that's also the quality of the garden city, that there's a lot of greenery in the garden city. And of course, also the idea was to have agriculture for each family to have in their own garden. How I see it today is that you cannot force every family to grow their own garden. So I would say it's not feasible now in the scale and in the lifestyle that we have nowadays, but this is something maybe we can implement in another way. So if each neighborhood has a place, a community garden that all the families, the interested one, can go and do the agriculture. So I think that would be feasible, but expecting that every single family will have a piece of garden that they will own, they will grow their own vegetables, maybe it's a bit optimistic.
Okay. Yeah, then thank you very much for your presentation and your comments and your answers. Then again, thank you very much, everyone, to be here today and listening these interesting presentations. Thank you to Sadia and Maza to bring us more the concept of garden cities. I learned a lot from your presentations, and also thanks to Rajab, who showed us the cool tool he developed and his team to show that it's also what I learned from your presentation was that it's possible to engage people to give their data so you can use them for further planning and development of better solutions. So yeah, thank you everyone. And if you're still interested in the topic of sustainable cities, then you're very welcome to join our session tomorrow. I think the session tomorrow is also at 10:30, and there we want to talk about local energy system and the influence of our behavior of sustainable cities. So thank you everyone, have a nice lunch, and then see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.